it's just kind of a prop, and we don't really get the impact of it. But when you look at that in the RN in context of the book, I actually think it's a really fucking cool symbol to get tattooed on you, because it's like the signifier that you are the architect of the story, right? That's what it kind of becomes for Bastian when he enters the world. And so I like the idea of like, you know, something on your body that says like, I am the architect of my own story kind of thing.
Right.
I don't know. I like that.
Or even viewing it just from an artist standpoint, like I create story, and like
exactly.
that's important to me, and having that be represented.
I am a
way.
part of the NeverEnding story.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Maybe I'll get one.
Let's get him. We'll get that, and then we'll get the Inkling. Welcome, friends, to episode 192 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week we discuss Wolfgang Peterson's 1984 film, The NeverEnding Story. Turn around, look at what you see. Did it come back to you in a wave of nostalgia?
What a song. What a song. I mean, honestly, very, very clever of them to pick something so catchy. I mean, so many kids in the 80s had to have been singing that.
Oh yeah,
just over and over again.
So from what I could find, it actually didn't do super well when it first released, but when the film came out on like home video is when like it took off even like way more, and like I think it charted at that point. Like the song got on the charts and stuff.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean that makes sense. It is funny because one of my observations was like it's weird to watch this movie in HD.
Yeah.
It feels almost wrong.
Yep.
Because the way I saw it originally was on a VHS copy, you know, grainy, probably 4:3 ratio instead of that widescreen. And it looks just completely different when you're seeing everything in crystal clear HD, you know.
Surprisingly, some of this stuff holds up really well. I saw some like stills that people had taken from the film, and like Falkor still looks pretty good.
It's almost all practical, right? Like it's practical stuff is gonna by definition hold up more.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree. Falkor looks good. Like,
I mean, you have your matte paintings and stuff as the background sometimes, but
even that holds up okay. It's
in a way,
and honestly, it's the HD is what allows you to see that it's a painting because it's so clear and crisp. But like in that lower quality, you can't tell that it's a painting sometimes. Like that, so some stuff works better, some stuff doesn't work as well. You know, we can get into the effects and stuff. I think when stuff is still, it looks better. When it moves is often what becomes difficult, and that's the case where like computer animation does so well is you can have a dragon jumping around on screen, like interacting with things and moving in a way that the Falkor just can't when he's, you know, fairly static.
Even like just like CG augmenting practical effects that they can do now to hide the imperfections and that kind of thing can be game changing. But so I think that I kind of underestimated the like impact of this film. I think in my memory I was like, yeah, I liked it. It's like, you know, it's fun, but it's like a pretty massive achievement for the time period to pull something like this off. And I was reading that it was like the largest German production ever at the time.
Wow.
Wolfgang Peterson, this is his first English language film, even though there is a German version of it. And most of the crew's German, and even some of the actors are German. So it's really interesting. How much did you pick up on the dubbing that was going on? Because there was a bit of it.
Was there really? No, I didn't catch it. I sort of attributed some stuff to some weird audio issues because I was having a problem where at the beginning where if I rewound on my digital version, like sometimes the sound would start stuttering, and then it would like fix itself.
Oh,
anyway, it was a rental on YouTube, and I don't know if it was some problem with the coding or what.
Could just be streaming.
So I wasn't like being very critical of anything not quite lining up, so I probably missed that.
Yeah, a lot of the like I think Rockbiter like was what the lips and you know you can chalk some of this up to.
Well, that one I completely would have missed because I assumed that was just a limitation of the way the lips were able to move, and all the puppets for that in that sense I thought the mouths didn't line up with their speech pretty frequently, but I assumed that was more of a practical reason. But it's interesting to think that maybe it was more of a dubbing issue.
Yeah, I think, maybe a little bit of both, but we're talking about the puppets a little bit now, so I think it's cool to know, like, 15 people were used to operate Falkor. They had to do it in different sections, so anytime you notice, like, his entire body's never really seen on screen. It's like his front section, his middle section, something like that. And just I watched a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and I was really blown away with just like how technical everything had to be with in terms of like operating it, because it's this massive like marvel of engineering that they put together. I heard that the same person who crafted E.T., like the puppet and animatronics for E.T., did a lot of the work on this film as well.
Before we get into all the specifics, I just kind of want to like give general thoughts about, my reaction to watching it and my kind of experience. This was a wild nostalgia ride. There was so much of this movie I had forgotten, but came back in watching it. And then there's also a lot that I just didn't remember at all and was able to sort of experience for the first time. And in some ways, I felt a little bit like Bastian on the back of Falkor, like just having a joyful experience, reliving my youth. And the look of everything, it's so interesting to think of this being a contemporary movie set in the 80s and showing somewhat what life looked like at the time, even though it was, German production, but still, like it brought back my childhood to me. And we see so many movies today trying to recapture that look of like what it looked like in the 80s, but it's cool to see the authentic, like that kitchen when he's in that with his father. A lot of that was bringing back waves of nostalgia for me. So I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff there, but there's also some stuff that doesn't hold up super well. Some of the effects, as much as they're like an incredible achievement, there's just limitations for what they can actually do. And so much of it, I think, relies on the children who are watching it, because that's mainly who the audience is, to suspend disbelief and like fill in the blanks, like fill in the movements that you don't actually see on camera, and go like, and imagine what's actually happening between scenes. Things like that, and if the more you're willing to do all that work for the movie, the more you're going to enjoy it. And as a kid, I was totally willing, to imagine this Falkor like flying through the sky and being sinewy and moving gracefully and like all this stuff that like watching the movie it doesn't really do, but in my mind it did, in my memory it did.
Yeah, I think I did a really great job of putting myself in the shoes of like a child viewing this movie, because I think you kind of have to. If you try to engage with it as an adult and want to have like a really critical eye, you could tear it apart. But I don't think that's what the movie's really there for, and there's so much magic, I think, there for a young kid in this film, and then what it means, like what stories mean and imagination can mean, and what the overall story, we talked about it in the book episode as well, but what the overall story is trying to engage with that audience. And like I can remember what it was like when I realized like the story was engaging with Bastian, and then Bastian, that at the same time engaging with us who was viewing this movie. So like it's got a lot of magic.
There was that moment where they said there are people experiencing this right now, and they were careful not to say reading. They were saying like viewing or interacting or something, I think the Empress says. And it welcomed us in as the viewers into the story in the same way that the book did. Very cool. And that makes me think of like part of the biggest joy of this movie, and I got to relive it a little bit, was seeing the experience of reading fantasy and losing yourself in a book and feeling like it's real to you and going on that adventure is captured so perfectly in this movie. And like, so like I identified with Bastian because I read tons of fantasy at his age, and he was around the age when I was watching it a little later that I was at the time. And I just felt so strongly like, yeah, that's what it's like. This movie gets it when you just read a fantasy novel and just feel like you're in another world going on these grand adventures.
Yeah. This world is like very inventive. It really does feel like a filmmaker who's trying to do something like what George Lucas did with Star Wars. Like it feels like they were like really big, really interesting sets. Like I thought a lot of like even just the attic set, the set where he's in the attic. The first time we walked in, I was like smiling. I was like, this is so cool. What a cool environment to read.
Probably the most unbelievable set.
Yeah.
even with all the fantasy, just the idea that that's a school's attic
like haunted looking, ancient attic.
But I loved it. It was and it's fine. Like go with it.
And a lot of the sets overall, like the Swamp of Sorrow, or Sadness, Swamp of Sadness is incredible. I think
Swamp of Sorrow might be like a magic card or something. There's some reason we keep saying that.
I don't know, D&D maybe.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway,
that set is incredible, and I was learning more about that in the behind the scenes. Is just like that's all obviously on a stage. They built all that out with those massive trees and actually had muck, and the way that the horse was actually like going into, which there's a lot to talk about with that, because there's sort of this urban legend.
I have a lot of questions about that scene. We'll get to that. So yeah, I want to touch on the look of the film a little bit, just in general, and especially like the moment they saw the ivory tower for the first time. I was like, this is the cover of a fantasy novel. This is like a poster that they have put on screen.
Yeah.
And maybe it was some sort of matte painting or something, but like it looked incredible, and it captured a very specific time in fantasy and the look of certain things, and it evoked that in such a cool way. And then I just also want to compliment the movie on being different. Like, this is very clearly not an American production, and you can feel that. The perspective is different. It's just not the way American filmmakers were making films. And there were decisions that were made that don't feel like they align necessarily with like American culture at the time. And it just seemed like it had different considerations and different things it was trying to do. And a lot of that is cultural, I think, and some of it comes from the source material. And because of that, it feels like a really unique film that stands out when I look back at a lot of American 80s films.
Yeah. Something interesting, too, is that this movie, the German cut of this movie that was released in Germany was massive. Like, it was like one of the biggest movies they've ever had at the time. And the way that you were talking about some of the things that were maybe changed for the American version, and there's a lot of that like synthiness that's in this, and that wasn't in the German version. So it's interesting. I mean, there may be some of it.
I would love to see if this exists. People let me know. I assume it does, and maybe we could watch it as a bonus or something. But like the German cut with the German language, but with like American subtitles, so that I can follow what's being said, or English subtitles. That would be really cool to watch, because I would be really curious to see how it's different and how it. I mean, my suspicion is it might be better, but I don't know, maybe not.
So I think there was some synthiness like built into the score, but specifically like the NeverEnding Story song. That's right. American added, and
that makes sense.
A lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I like what you said about sort of this like different perspective from a different culture, viewing things, and like Germany has its own film history to pull from,
right? And
like the way that like you can see sort of like in sequence along their history, in the same way that we look at American cinema history is I don't know, fascinating to think about, especially because like I've talked about it many times, but German expressionism and a lot of like the darker elements of cinema that like came from Germany. And what we can like infer about this movie based on that, like some of the darkness that exists, like the nothing in this movie, which I heard Wolfgang Peterson talk about it, and like he says that that's not actually the nothing that we're seeing, because the nothing actually is nothing. It's sort of like the harbinger of the nothing. The clouds and everything that we're seeing is like the warning signs that it's
the
coming.
Outer edges of it. Yeah, that makes sense.
And also, I thought that stuff was incredible looking. The different cloud formations and like colors and stuff. And
did you find anything about how they did that?
Yeah, I did. So
very cool.
It's colored oil into salt water. For all of those, so it's not actually clouds. Like it wasn't any. They were actually creating these like masses and sort of like flowing, moving clouds in that way, and changing the colors and stuff. Sometimes I don't know, amazing stuff.
The inventiveness of that is really really cool. I wonder if any of those like VFX breakdown shows have ever talked about this movie, because I think it would be a good one to do.
Yeah.
Let me know if anybody has seen like a Corridor Crew or something like break down this. Send me a link.
Yeah.
And if not, we should suggest it to him. Anyway, I did want to give a little anecdote. So a friend of mine who I went to Viable Paradise with, Simone Heller, she is an author who has been nominated for Hugo, and she also lives and works in Germany as a translator. She's German. She translates English to German, and I think vice versa. And I was talking to her a little bit about this movie, this book. We do want to have her on the podcast at some point. We almost had her on recently, but it didn't end up working out, but hopefully soon. But she gave me some cool little tidbits, and I just wanted to share them with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of them was about the translation in general. She said, so I brought up the whole thing about the first letter in the book and how I was like, oh, I wonder how they did that. And she kind of like shrugged that off, like no big deal.
Okay.
One thing she did mention was the name of the dragon in German was like Fulkor.
Okay.
Or something like that. I can't say it just right, but like when they were translating into English, they had to change it to Falcor because it sounded like fucker, basically.
Oh man, I wish they'd left it now.
So they couldn't keep saying it over and over again. Oh, fucker the dragon.
That's great.
Yeah, which I thought was pretty funny. So like little things like that. And then just if you remember all those wild fantasy names, a lot of that had to be translated because it was like they were very German sounding, and I think it had to be shifted to be able to even be pronounced in English. So some difficulties there. Another thing she just mentioned is that it is massive over there, and Michael Ende is very famous. She grew up reading.
How about the movie though? So the book is massive.
So she grew up reading the book, loved it, but then the movie was huge. Everybody watched it, she said, over there. She said she got teased for people, and she said many young girls were teased about this, about having a crush on Atreyu. Apparently he was like a big deal over there.
I believe it,
which I could totally see. And then she said there is a well-known German band named Tokotronic who has a hit song called, and this is not the German, there's a German title, but this is the translation. Michael Ende, You Ruined My Life is the name of the song.
Yeah, me too, man, me too.
So anyway, I just thought it was fun to get a little bit of that insight into like, it is genuinely huge over there. It sounds like it is the biggest fantasy thing in Germany.
Wow.
From what she was saying.
Incredible.
Like, it's massive. So
I watched the movie first, so Wolfgang Peterson kind of ruined my life.
Yeah.
And I think we should definitely dig into like history with the material, because like we've touched on it a little bit, but like obviously you said you saw it on a VHS tape. It was the same for me, and I think the first time I saw it I was like 7, something like that. And the scene that like absolutely horrified me, that was absolutely horrifying to me, was the POV. So we get like the wolf being like born or whatever, that we're seeing like the wolf come into reality, and then the POV through the woods chasing Atreyu was absolutely terrifying to me, and I couldn't stand to watch it until I grew up a little bit more, and then eventually was able to watch it. I think I would just skip that part, and then obviously the horse scene is like completely traumatic.
Artax, yeah. So real quick before we get to the horse scene, that moment of going through the swamps is interesting because it's exactly the thing I was talking about. You have to imagine the wolf sort of charging through the swamp because we don't see it. All we ever see is its head. Like we don't ever see like legs moving really. So it's, but as like a young viewer, like you have no trouble doing that.
Right.
It reminded me of like the scene in Evil Dead where it's just like a camera going through the woods and making noises and people running from it.
Right.
And, it's the same kind of idea. It's like if you don't ever show the monster, I guess you don't have to make it, but it works. And at the time, I think it works better. Now there's certain expectations, but it is fun to look back and see what they were able to pull off with little tricks like that.
Definitely. And like you say, the imagination is worse when you're a kid because it just runs wild and it can be nightmare inducing.
Yeah. Let's save the horse talk until we get to it in the plot, okay. I think. Because I have a lot of thoughts on that scene.
Yeah, that sounds good. Something that I think is definitely necessary to talk about with this film is the U.S. cut of it was actually overseen by Steven Spielberg. So he was or is friends with Wolfgang Peterson, and when it was going to be released in the US, Steven Spielberg was involved in the editing process. He was involved in like adding sound effects and cutting. I think like something like 7 minutes was cut from the film, and he had like a big hand in sort of developing what would be the final cut of this film in the US.
Okay, that's what I actually want to see. I want to see the 7 minutes that were cut from the film.
Yeah.
So someone should let us know. Is that on YouTube? Maybe we can find it on YouTube.
So according to Spielberg and some of the reports, is like cultural stuff. Yeah, like things that made more sense to American audiences were left in, and then things that maybe wouldn't have were cut. So yeah, like you say, we could have seen a different version of this film that's more German. So yeah, let us know.
That'd be cool to see.
Apparently, as a thank you, the original Aron hangs in Steven Spielberg's office in like a glass case as a thank you from Wolfgang Peterson.
Wow, I love that. And I wanted to comment on the Aron and like how it's a great design. First off, it looks very cool. When I was looking, I was making I was putting together an image for our YouTube video. Anyway, I ended up searching for the Aron. And there's tons of people who've gotten this tattooed on themselves. So you see all these really cool tattoos. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. You know, it's this very iconic, cool looking symbol. But I was also thinking about how in the movie, it's just kind of a prop and we don't really get the impact of it. But when you look at that in the Aron in context of the book, I actually think it's a really fucking cool symbol to get tattooed on you because it's like the signifier that you are the architect of the story, right? That's what it kind of becomes for Bastian when he enters the world. And so I like the idea of like, you know, something on your body that says like, I am the architect of my own story kind of thing.
Right.
I don't know. I like that.
Or even viewing it just from an artist standpoint, like I create story and like
exactly.
That's important to me, and having that be represented.
I am a part of the NeverEnding story.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Maybe I'll get one.
Let's get him. We'll get that, and then we'll get the Inkling.
Yeah. I don't have any tattoos, but you know, at some point I may. So we'll see.
Yeah,
maybe
me
I'll
too.
come up with something.
I always thought that I would have so many tattoos as soon as I turned 18, and then I'm so glad I didn't get them because they were all bad ideas when I was 18.
And this is just an aside. I'm going to put it out there so that people can hold me to it. But I've always said that if when I publish my first novel, I'll get a tattoo to commemorate it.
Hell yeah.
I don't know what it'll be, but I'll get something to commemorate it. So
cool.
Hopefully look forward to that.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so let's talk about Wolfgang Peterson a little bit. We did touch on him in Enemy Mine way back when, probably about a year or two ago now.
Yeah, such a unique vision. Like the look of his movies is unlike anything else that I can think of, honestly. Like maybe some like Willow or like certain other. I can think of a few other sort of 80s movies that had a lot of puppetry and
yeah.
But there's something just really unique about his vision and his creatures and his attention to detail in these sets is pretty astounding.
Yeah. It reminded me a lot of like other like Dark Crystal, like I mentioned last episode, and like Labyrinth. Labyrinth was another one. That's another movie where people will watch it now and be like, that movie sucks. And I'm like, no, you don't understand what it was like seeing it when I was a kid then, because it's got a lot
I think a lot of people like that movie. I'd be shocked, yeah.
I do think if somebody hadn't seen it though, like if you just go watch it right now, it's a little I don't know, it can be a little hard to click into, I guess. Sorry, I derail it again, but I was thinking about like children today. If you had a child who was watching, you know, How to Train Your Dragon, like watching some other like Pixar movies and stuff around this age, you know, 8, 9, 10, and then you were like, hey, watch this movie, and you put on NeverEnding Story for them, like what would their reaction be? First off, you'd probably traumatize them, like we were all traumatized, so you'd have to go in knowing like I'm gonna traumatize my child now in the way that I was. Yeah, sometimes Pixar will go there, but not like this. I don't think there's anything on the level of Artax, in my opinion. We'll get to it. But I mean the opening of Up is like pretty, if they understand what's going on, the opening of Up is so dramatic. It's different though. Yeah, we'll get to it. But anyway, and just like so much about this movie's, it doesn't like handle kids with like with the same sort of care that we see today. It's like we're just gonna throw stuff at them that is really dark and really twisted. They'll learn to handle it. Life's rough. They'll be all right. Yeah. Anyway. So Wolfgang Peterson is a German film director, producer, and screenwriter. He was nominated for 2 Academy Awards for the World War II submarine warfare film Das Boot in 1981. His other films include... We talked about some of this on our Enemy Mine episode, but we're just going over it a little bit. Just retouching, just in case. Yeah, because I had forgotten a lot of it. So his other films include The NeverEnding Story, 1984, Enemy Mine, 1985, and then he started to once he jumped over and started doing American films as well, American produced films. In the Line of Fire in 1993, Outbreak in 1995, which had a big resurgence during the pandemic.
Oh, that Dustin Hoffman movie?
Yes. Yep.
Interesting. That's Wolfgang Peterson?
Yep.
Wow, what a thing.
Air Force One.
Oh my gosh,
yeah,
really?
Air Force One was him. The Perfect Storm.
I'm kind of sad he went away from this fantasy pocket. I appreciate, and The Perfect Storm, yeah, that's a pretty good movie. I appreciate the idea of broadening what you can do, but man, did he ever return to doing some zany fantasy projects?
So Das Boot is obviously very grounded in a way that's not the NeverEnding Story. So that was his first film that was nominated for stuff, and then he did NeverEnding Story, which was his first fantasy film actually. And in the documentary that I watched, he was talking about that. He was like, "This is my first fantasy film, and it's all about imagination. So I really want to dig into the imagination of it, and I should treat myself as a kid right now, just creating what comes to me in that way." And then Enemy Mine is sci-fi, and then everything else I think that he's done hasn't really ever returned to genre stuff as much. It's In the Line of Fire, Outbreak, Air Force One in 1997, The Perfect Storm in 2000, Troy in 2004, and then Poseidon in 2006.
This is the director of Troy? I did not know that.
Yep.
Wow. That has one of the coolest fights. I mean, say what you will about the rest of the movie, but Hector and Achilles doing battle is one of the coolest fights ever.
Very cool, yeah. Yeah, so he's done a lot that you're familiar with.
Yeah, I'm shocked. I didn't realize I had seen so much from him. That's pretty astounding.
So if you wanted more about his backstory, I think we do a good job of giving some more information in Enemy Mine, and I would hate to rehash all of that. So we'll just say he successfully made the jump from German filmmaking to American filmmaking. Whether you think that's a good thing or not, but his movies became massive. Obviously, as time went on, he became bigger and bigger. And
you could probably have a fun experience of seeing how bad my memory is by going back and listening to me probably react in the same way to the information that you just gave me, and then I clearly have forgotten it since then.
Yeah. Hey, there's so many people that we talk about every week, so
so often people come up and talk to me about an episode that is 2 or 3 years old. And they just listen to it, so it's fresh to them, but I don't remember so much of what I say on this podcast.
Somebody recently tried to talk to me about our Memento episode, and I was like, oh boy. I was like, not only is it a complex narrative, I don't remember the specific details about everything that happens, and then they were trying to ask me questions about it, and I was like, yeah, I tried to do my best, but it can be tough to recall all that.
Yeah, it's so true. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and I don't know if you saw anything about this or not, but one thing I like to do when I watch these movies is to take a screen cap or take a picture of the moment where it says adapted by a novel or adapted from a novel by, and then it gives the name of the author. Mm-hmm. I did not see that anywhere in this movie.
Yeah.
And I wondered if that probably had something to do with that lawsuit we talked about.
It did, yeah. He wanted his name completely removed from the production. Okay,
so that's something that Michael Ende wanted.
He wanted that, yeah. He said that it was going to happen, period. But what's interesting is he does have a very small credit in the end credits. He actually does. They did. Okay,
I watched a good bit of it, and I didn't see it, but I didn't read every name.
Yeah, so. I didn't see it either, but when I was reading about it, they said it was very small. So it's in there somewhere, just hidden, probably.
I mean, that's a shame, and I respect that that's something he wanted, but it's a shame that it came to that because so much of this movie is him. It's his story, and sure, it was adapted and changed, but it's a shame that people will watch this movie, and I did, and many people will watch this movie and think, wow, Wolfgang Peterson really came up with an interesting story here, and because that's who's credited as a screenwriter, and that's it, and it's now with the proliferation of the internet, a lot of people can look it up easily, but you have to remember, in the 80s, if it wasn't in the movie, you probably just didn't know. So many people probably did not know this was a book. And to watch this movie and see so much of what you created come to life and to feel divorced from that creation in the way that he felt, I don't know. It's a shame, and I respect that it's something he wanted, but it's a shame that it came to that.
Yeah. Especially because the lasting legacy of it is and I think we've seen this with Stephen King, to go back to the thing that we talk about a lot, in the way that he hated the Shining adaptation so much. And I think if you ask him nowadays, he's probably gotten over it and been like, you know what, like so many other things have happened. It's a part of your oeuvre at the end of the day. People know that Stephen King is attached to it.
I think he's said something to the effect of like he recognizes that it is a good film, even if he still maintains that it's a bad adaptation.
Right.
Which, like, that's fair. If you want to say that as the creator, I'll give it to you.
It's just it's always, and it seems like it's less frequent nowadays. It seems like people are more clear on exactly how things are going to happen. But there's just a couple of specific scenes that were like a bridge too far for Michael Ende, and I want to talk about those when we get there. So do you want to jump into the plot?
Yeah. Okay. I'm really curious to hear what those are. So let's do it.
So 10-year-old Bastian Bucks is a shy outcast who lives with his widowed father. One day, on his way to school, Bastian is chased by bullies, but escapes by hiding in a bookstore, annoying the bookseller. Bastian's interest in books leads him to ask about the one Coriander is reading, but the bookseller advises against reading it, saying that it is not a safe story like regular books. With his curiosity piqued, Bastian secretly takes the book, titled The NeverEnding Story, leaving a note promising to return it, and hides in the school's attic to read. The book describes the fantasy world of Fantasia, slowly being devoured by a malevolent force called the Nothing. The childlike empress who rules Fantasia has fallen ill, and young warrior Atreyu is tasked to discover a cure, believing that once the Empress is well, the Nothing will no longer be a threat. Atreyu is given a medallion called the Orin that can guide and protect him in the quest. As Atreyu sets out, the Nothing summons a vicious and highly intelligent wolf-like creature named Gmork to kill Atreyu.
So in our real world, we get a very Steven Spielberg-esque scene of the bullies chasing him and tossing him into a dumpster, which is, I don't know. I mean, it's. I feel like in real life it would be much worse than it is on here. Like, but
they are young enough to where like maybe they aren't that violent yet. But yeah, it does feel like a very like traditional bullying, like PG film.
Yeah,
scene.
But also he like comes out with like little bits of like hay on his hair. Like, yeah, it's very anyway. Yeah, that's such an 80s trope, right? Like these bullies that are usually like three boys who are just reprehensible, irredeemable, and they're picking on our main character. But yeah, and then he runs and he hides in this bookstore. We don't get, do we get Coriander's name? I don't think he's named, but this older fellow who is from the book somewhat, but a little different here. He's at first a little bit gruff, but like quickly warms to Bastian in a way that I felt like the book version was a lot more grumpy and I don't know. I kind of prefer the book version of this character personally.
It's ambiguous in the book. It feels like he doesn't like hint that he's in on it or anything like that. So like as we go into the book, we don't have that much. But here he's like smiling when he runs out with the book and he's like expecting it. And I kind of liked the performance because he's like all up in his face and he's like telling him about how it's not safe and everything. I thought it was fun and sets us on the path well enough. But yeah, I don't know if
I mean I think it does work for the adaptation and I see why they did it. You know, I just personally like the version we got in the book a little better, but I totally get why they changed it. And I think it makes sense. Yeah.
So what do you think about our introduction to Fantasia, which is a change? And I actually have some information on why that was a change. It's sort of a translation thing.
Okay, interesting. What do you mean by a change? Because we had the three messengers meeting together. I guess the scene plays out a little differently.
So in the English translation of the original novel, the mystical land was called Fantastica. The original German name, Phantasian, translates more accurately as Fantasia, apparently, is something I read online.
And that's what I was talking about with the translation issues. You're translating these, like, created words, and you're trying to find a way that naturally translates into English. So that's kind of a translation thing. That makes sense.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting because Fantasia, obviously, for me, when I think of Fantasia, I think of Disney's Fantasia.
Wait. What were we saying last week? Were we saying Fantastica or Fantasia?
It was Fantastica, yeah, last week.
Okay. So in the movie, it's Fantasia?
Yes.
I didn't realize that. I guess it's close enough to where I assumed it was the same, but... So they changed it from Fantastica to Fantasia.
Now, it's interesting to change it for a movie into Fantasia because Fantasia, like Disney's Fantasia, is so famous.
And it existed at the time,
and
right?
it existed, it was like from the 40s, film. I think, yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting, yeah. Weird choice.
It is a weird choice, but Fantastica doesn't. I like Fantasia more than I like Fantastica, but I also have the association for the Disney thing, so I can kind of see it going either way. But interesting choice to change the name.
It seems like an arbitrary decision. I think Fantastica would have worked fine, and you're keeping it the same, so I don't know why you don't just go with it. But okay.
Yeah, it happened, but So how about the introduction to the actual world, the characters that we meet in the first scene?
I was happy to see that I did remember the giant bike, because the Rackbiter is rolling up on this like steamroller and everyone's running out of the way. And
I did not remember that, and I was like, damn, he was right. It's like a fucking motorcycle, rock motorcycle or something.
Yeah. And I liked how freaking huge he was, and then like eating the rocks and it's raining down.
So cool.
Just the look of all of these beings. The snail's head is like so weird and just disturbing but cool. Like, this is the kind of stuff that I was saying, like the attention to detail, the character creation, the monster creation, or whatever you want to call it, creatures.
Props to like costuming and set design and everything like that, because it looks amazing, and it really is create a believable fantasy world, you know?
Yeah, and this scene was like, there was definitely a bit of humor in it. You know, you had the like sleeping bat who kept falling asleep all the time, and the racing snail, which is like really, it made this sound that was really grody. It was like it was like slurping along the ground. Like, I wonder how that'll sound on the podcast. Anyway, it was quite a sound, and I thought the scene was fun, and then the approach to the Ivory Tower again was a moment that I was struck with. A great music, and then it looked like the cover of a fantasy novel. I was really taken with it.
Yeah. The decision to make it have that comedy element, I think, is important for a kids movie like this as well. Something that's catering to that, because I think that caters to an even maybe younger demographic when you have that, and like a slightly older child demographic can enjoy it, and like we still enjoyed it. So it was fun, and the scale of it, like you talked about, I think that was so smart to play with scale in that way, with the way that they use miniatures and the way that they use sets and the way that they use all of this other stuff.
There's a lot of clever trickery with size, like the sizes between different characters and stuff throughout the movie that I thought was really cool.
And I can't help but think about like fantasy and miniatures and all that kind of stuff and then leads me to like what would be Lord of the Rings eventually, and how like that's like seamless miniature. Which got
a shout out in this version a little bit. Lord of the Rings, Tarzan, which
20,000 Leagues.
Edgar Rice Burroughs we covered, and 20,000. Yeah, so it was. I thought it was cool. One thing I want to mention just before we move on, the Aran, when he gets the Aran, the idea of this like story influencer reminded me of a thing in Wheel of Time, which I know you haven't read, but just briefly I want to say for people who have, the Taverine or Tavirin, I don't know how you say it, because I've only ever read it, but there's this concept of these people who have the ability to sort of, like, things are fated in that world, but if you're one of these people, you have the ability to like change things. You have like a special power to alter fate. And I thought that these two ideas seemed linked to me. I don't know if there was any influence going on here from Robert Jordan in this book and or not, but the idea of being able to sort of like change the story as a power and a magic in like a fantasy book. I don't know. I see some like connective tissue here. Yeah,
and we talked about how it can become dangerous too, right? When the character has too much agency in the story, and then they can change it entirely, and how that can become kind of stale. But finding that perfect balance, which I think that it sounds like they were able to find.
Well, yeah, I mean, in Wheel of Time, they're not like gods. It's just it's like more subtle than that. It's just like their actions have the ability to like break fated things. I don't know. Anyway, we can talk about that when we get to Wheel of Time.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm very excited one day to read that, because that's been on my tube.
Yeah,
a decade ago I was planning on reading it. So I'm excited.
We're getting the show later this year, so stay tuned.
I cannot wait. Yeah. All right. So the next section, Atreyu's quest directs him to the giant turtle-like advisor Morla the Ancient One in the swamps of sadness. Though the Orin protects Atreyu, his beloved horse Artax is lost to the swamp, and he continues alone. Morla does not have the answers Atreyu seeks, but directs him to the southern oracle 10,000 miles away. Gmork closes in as Atreyu succumbs to exhaustion, trying to escape the swamps, but is narrowly saved by Falkor. Falkor takes him to the home of 2 gnomes that live near the gates to the Southern Oracle. Atreyu crosses the first gate, but is perplexed when the second gate, a mirror that shows the viewer's true self, reveals a boy which Bastian recognizes as himself. Atreyu eventually meets the Southern Oracle, who tells him the only way to save the Empress is to find a human child who lives beyond the boundaries of Fantasia, to give her a new name. Atreyu and Falkor flee as the Nothing consumes the Southern Oracle.
Let's talk about Artax. That scene, brutal, and honestly, way more. Like I talked about how like in the book, Artax talks.
Yep.
And how that changes the scene a little bit, and it's kind of dark how he's able to sort of narrate his own demise. But it's worse when he can't. When it's just this sweet animal who we get this like scene with him at the river, like right before this, the stream, like coming over and like snuggling with him and being all cute. And then as a kid, you're watching it and you're like, "Ooh, I love this horse. He's like a dog. He's like a big dog."
It's a fantasy horse too, right?
Yeah,
it's
like, he's so smart. He's so cool.
staple.
And then all of a sudden, oh no, he just starts sinking. And then this is clearly a real horse,
right,
that is being submerged in something. And then you can see what I read as genuine fear in the animal. And that upset me.
Yeah.
And they do a lot with it. And I was worried about the horse. And I hope that the horse was fine and not scarred by this. You said you have some behind the scenes stuff, so I'd be really curious.
So this is like a really long running there's like an urban legend around it that the horse actually died. And it was going on during the release of the film and like early on, and people just, before the internet, people would just talk about it. And they said,
I can totally see that. You watch this scene and you're like,
that horse actually died. Yeah.
Yeah, you like could believe it.
Right. So the way that they achieved, there's multiple steps to this. The horse didn't die. Spoiler alert. The horse survived. And there's multiple steps to this, and the way that in the documentary I watched, and I read some extra materials as well to see like different perspectives on it. But basically, they had 3 different horses that performed different tasks within the scene. There was a hydraulic lift in the muck that was lowering the horse down. They said that in training the horses, they were obviously not super stoked about being submerged. It's something very unnatural for a horse to want to be submerged in something like that.
I assumed they had to like restrain it so it couldn't get loose and like couldn't get out or swim or something.
From what I understand, it took 7 weeks to teach the horses how to do this, and basically they would do it incrementally, slowly lower it, and then have it stop at a certain point that's like, maybe a foot or something like that, and then allow the horse to get off, and just teaching the horse that it was still safe even if as it submerged. And then they continued to do that multiple times. And like I said, there were different horses to do different portions of it. So they became more used to different sections of it. But in the documentary that I watched, one of the filmmakers, it wasn't Wolfgang Peterson, probably one of the producers or somebody like that, was kind of happy with how in that final shot where it's like basically up to its neck, how you could see basically genuine fear in the horse and how the acting was great and all this stuff. And I was like, well, I don't know that I love this scene at all. You know?
It's not called acting when an animal is terrified. It's called you terrified an animal.
Yeah.
They don't know they're acting.
Well, and he was specific. I guess the horse was totally fine being submerged up to that point, but it was with Atreyu pulling on the reins and screaming and stuff as well that it sort of like built to something that probably did end up scaring the horse, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to know the horse didn't die, at least. Hopefully it went on to have a happy life, and I guess it was a part of movie history now, so.
Artax actually, after the film, Noah Hathaway, who played Atreyu, was given the horse. And it was kind of unclear whether, like, because then there was something that was said about, like, if he was able to get it out of Germany or something like that. There was, like, some paperwork that couldn't, basically gifted to him. And I was unclear if he was able to bring it back to the States or whatever ended up happening with the horse. But overall, it sounds like the horse didn't, like, die on set or anything like that.
Okay.
So.
Well, I'm glad to know that is the case. That makes me feel a little better about the scene. So just as a scene, it is brutal, though. And as a kid, it feels like, I don't know. To me, this is more impactful than anything you'll see in a Pixar movie because there's a level of distance we're all aware of when we're watching a animated thing or we're watching a cartoon versus watching an actual animal.
I mean, we can liken it to the idea of in a book reading of a horse drowning and then seeing a horse literally drown. And so it's like something animated. Yeah, it's like the idea of something happening. And Pixar has plenty of that where it's like just like tons of like mortality stuff for kids and ideas for them to think about. But seeing a horse in danger like that is definitely way more visceral and scarier and seems real.
Yeah. And it seems so random and thoughtless. Like it just happens. And I'm glad that they mention it a few times later. He mentions his horse because I thought for a minute, I was like, they're never even going to mention this fucking horse again. And this scene was absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
I'm glad it does come up again later.
It fucked me up as a kid. Like I said in the book episode, I said it made me genuinely, it's the first time that I can remember confronting my mortality and like thinking about death in that way. And like, it comes for all of us and all of that. And it was, it fucked me up for sure.
Yeah. I think this is one of the reasons. There's a few things I think that contributed, but there's a reason this wasn't one of the movies that I would go back to a lot. There were a lot of films growing up for me that I watched so much that I wore the VHS copy out, and you know what I mean? Like it wouldn't work anymore. So like I had a few things that were just on repeat. This wasn't one of them, and I think that scene, and then I think some of the puppetry, as like brilliant as it was in design, just was like too creepy. Like I don't know, there's it hit that uncanny valley we talked about a little bit last week. Like just gave me the creeps, and I just didn't want to look at it.
Yeah.
So
I can see
in
it,
particular, I think Falcor's skin. He has like this like bumps on his back that would just like make my skin crawl when I saw it. There's like certain weird things that just, for whatever reason, I didn't like. And then, like watching the horse, like knowing you're going to have to watch a horse drown is a very tough thing for 10-year-old me to be like, let's put that movie on again. Yeah,
it's pretty skippable in my opinion. Once you've seen it once, it's pretty brutal stuff.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. So I assume you're going to tell me when we encounter any scenes that Ende had a problem with, and I assume this isn't one of them because he wrote it.
No, not necessarily. Yeah, he wrote this portion. It mostly has to do with the end, so we can get to that here in a second. But Morla, I thought Morla, the puppetry for Morla the turtle looked incredible.
Looked so good, and then climbing up on the back and coming off, and then the scale again, and then when the head comes out. And like it freaks out the kid and he screams.
Manipulating a face to achieve a sneeze like that.
Steven Spielberg helped cut this movie together. Yeah. He had to have been inspired by the scene in Jurassic Park, right?
I thought so too. I totally thought about that too.
Had to be. Like it looks so similar. Like the brontosaurus head or whatever is kind of like this big turtle head. And I don't know. There was so many similarities in that sneeze and the way it hits Atreyu. I was like, I wonder if this is a thing that he was sort of referencing or just inspired by.
It absolutely 100% has to be. When I saw it in the movie, I was like, that seems very much like that scene from Jurassic Park. And then I went and did the research and realized how involved Spielberg was. And I was like, no way. Did he just think like, oh yeah, I just randomly thought of this sneezing scene that I thought would be really comedic and funny from a creature to a kid. Yeah. No, he totally was either stealing it or referencing it or whatever. But,
Yeah. That's very cool. That's very interesting. It's cool.
I'm sure Wolfgang Peterson doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, he probably is fine with it. And this is also the part where we get the introduction of Gmork with the sort of green glowing eyes in the darkness. Very scary looking, wolf. And racing through the swamp, like you said, that scared you so much. So
it's the Artax followed by Gmork with the glowing eyes, and then the POV running through the woods. And I was like, yeah, fuck this. When I was a kid,
and then Falkor comes down out of the sky and rescues him at the last second when he's about to suffer the same fate as Artax, and then also get eaten by a wolf. I don't know. Pulls him out of the muck. Atreyu gets so filthy in this movie. It's kind of awesome. And then he rides on the back of Falkor in this like soaring scene where he's flying through like real images of landscapes. And again, it's like your imagination makes it this graceful thing that when you're actually looking at what's on screen, it's like very clear he's sitting on a big, rig and just like over a green screen. Like you can tell what it is, but the effect works really well for the time. And, it did a good job of like making me the kid go like, oh my God, I wish I could ride on the back of Falkor. That'd be really cool.
Yeah. To touch on sort of some of the stuff you're talking about, like the way that Falkor interacts with the world, like there's a moment where he finds the medallion, the Orin, and then there's also the moment when he's like picking up Atreyu. It's very much like there's like jump cuts in there, and then there's also like subtle dissolves and things to like try to make it look like he's doing things, but there's like, it's clear that like they were like, and cut and put the scene of him in the hand and cut back to it or whatever they needed to do. And it's an interesting way to sort of get around it, but it is a moment where you can, you could see how unrealistic it is. So,
Yeah, but I mean, I forgive it. Falkor sounds like a stoner to me. He sounds like a straight up stoner. Like, oh yeah, he's so like, whatever, man. Yeah, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
All about luck, man.
Yeah, like the personality and vibe of Falkor, I thought was pretty comical in the movie. Different than the book. Pretty fun though.
So I believe the same voice actor, as far as the English is concerned, did Rockbiter, Gamork, and Falkor.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Shows some cool range. All very different voices. There, yeah.
Oh, another thing that I meant to mention that's just like crazy references, which I actually went and looked at a picture, and you can kind of make out some of this stuff, but people, Reddit threads and things like that really picked it apart. During the first Ivory Tower scene, when Atreyu is, just first being selected to go out there, there's all the different creatures, which were really awesome looking.
I wanted to mention how cool that was. All these like big-headed guys in the background, and just really, really interesting design. Yeah.
Yeah, like people with like 3 different faces on one head, and then like splitting faces. And
I was really taken with just how inventive and creative the look was for every person's, person in quotes, like standing around in the Ivory Tower.
Well, speaking of which, in terms of character creations, in that first Ivory Tower scene, when they're all gathered together, if you look very closely, you can see characters such as Yoda, Mickey Mouse, Chewbacca, C-3PO, the Ewoks, E.T., and Gumby in the background.
Wow. I didn't notice them, but now I kind of want to go back and pause and just...
Yeah, check it out.
It must just be like silhouettes or something. Right?
Kind of, yeah. And you can it doesn't... Obviously, it's not like a very clear Yoda.
Some of it might be like a, kind of a leap to say this is Yoda, like I imagine. But I want to see some stills now.
People do believe it, though. People do really think that like they threaded all of these in there. And, I think there's a good argument for most of them in the screenshots I saw.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then we got to talk about the Sphinxes before we move on. Just I think a lot of that looked really cool. Just massive. They had to construct these pretty massive Sphinx, and Atreyu like going in through the doors and everything. That's something that definitely stuck in my memory a lot. When I thought about this movie, I thought about the Sphinxes and the way that they almost open their eyes, but he gets away and he goes through the gate to the next gate, and I love that stuff. I thought it was really cool.
I think it's got to be noted that there are very prominent breasts on these Sphinx. Yeah. Yes. And like I was like, why? And what is the decision? And I think it's like, is there Freudian stuff going on here? Is it like fear of women, like, or like the power of breasts on us, or like I feel like there's like some subconscious shit going on there. But also just on a surface level, it was an interesting decision to put that in ostensibly a children's movie. And not to say like I'm a prude or anything, but I don't know. It's just, it felt like the camera was like very clear about we're going to look at them. And
is it gratuitous? Is it weird? Maybe?
Is it to kind of titillate like the young audience to be like, ooh, that's something I'm not allowed to see? Like,
yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
So the something interesting that you just nailed down though was one thing that Michael Ende hated. Michael Ende, he couldn't stand the fact that they decided to put like large breasts on these Sphinx. He was like, it's so unnecessary and it doesn't fit in this children's story at all.
Okay. I mean, I guess I'm with him. I can see it. I don't know if it's enough to make me want to remove my name from an adaptation, but I can see that. Yeah, because I kind of agree. It felt like weird and like unnecessary, and again, like you could do the same thing and just not put nipples on them, and then for whatever reason it seems more artistic or something. I don't know. Again, I'm not a prude, but it's just like it's a weird thing to be in this children's movie and have it be so prominent.
Yeah. Anyway. I don't know. Wolfgang Peterson, he really wanted to put those in there, though. Yeah. Apparently. Oh, so another couple of things that I haven't mentioned along the way.
Like, can you imagine if you saw a Pixar movie today and there was a big pair of CGI boobs on like some like fantasy-esque creature, but it's very clearly human-looking boobs, and they're just like, here we go. We're just gonna put that in our Pixar film and show it to kids.
It's artistic, yeah. I mean,
there would be such an outcry. I don't know. Anyway, it's whatever. It's like I'm not I'm not personally offended by it or anything, but it was a decision.
So Michael Ende also absolutely hated the Falkor design. Hated that it looked like a dog. Wanted it to look like a dragon.
Yeah, big floppy ears. Definitely looked a lot less dragon-like. Sounded like a stoner.
Wolfgang Peterson did not like the comparison. He was like, we kind of did a little bit of dog stuff, but people call it like a flying dog, and that's not what it is. It's a dragon. And like
you put big dog ears on it, people are gonna call it a dog.
Yeah, well, he doesn't like that, so there's that. So yeah, that's just another little piece of the puzzle that Michael Ende. So and overall,
there's literally a moment where he's like scratching his ear, very much like a dog. So yeah, I thought they were. I figured that was a very deliberate decision to make because we all love dogs, and a dog dragon gives it's like a connect. I mean, like I read books about Jane Yolen's Dragon's Blood series. It was like one of the first novels I ever checked out from the library myself, and that's all about a boy who like raises a dragon from, I think it's like hatching into like a full size thing, and he rides on it, and he like bonds with it, and my love of dogs absolutely translated into my love of dragons, and like that connection is there. So the idea of a dog dragon, I think, is a really clever thing, but I still contend that some of the design was just off-putting to me, and it still felt weird. He has like a bubbly skin at one point when they're looking at it, and it just throws it. I don't know, whatever reason, it kind of creeps me out. And then I don't know, he has this wink he does, which is weird. Like I don't know if you noticed, like Falkor winks at him several times, and I
saw it, yeah.
Why are we I don't know. I understand it's like they're probably very limited on what they could do, but there's just something strange about this wink. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. So Michael Ende, we talked about a few of the things, but I think the main thing that was like sort of a bridge too far for him was the fact that they were only going to do half the story.
Yeah.
And that was such a big deal for him that, and then in addition to once he saw the half that they were covering and then the decisions that they were making, some of the things I've mentioned, was not a fan of that. But there's one final thing that I'll talk about after I read this last section.
Okay.
In flight, Atreyu is knocked from Falkor's back into the sea, losing the Orin in the process. He wakes on the shore of some ruins where he finds several murals depicting his adventure, including one of Gmork. Gmork then reveals himself and explains that Fantasia represents humanity's imagination and is thus without boundaries, while the nothing is a manifestation of the loss of hopes and dreams. Atreyu battles and kills Gmork as the nothing begins to consume the ruins. Falkor manages to retrieve the Orin and rescue Atreyu. The two find themselves in a void with only small fragments of Fantasia remaining. They spot the Empress's ivory tower among the fragments. Inside, Atreyu apologizes for failing the Empress, but she assures him that he has succeeded in bringing to her a human child who has been following his quest, Bastion. She further explains that just as Bastion is following Atreyu's story, others are following Bastion's, making this part of the NeverEnding story. As the nothing begins to consume the tower, the Empress explains that Bastion must call out her new name to save Fantasia. Bastion doesn't believe that he has been incorporated into the adventure and sees these events as just a story. He eventually gives in after the Empress pleads directly to Bastion to call out her new name. He runs to the window of the attic and calls out the name he has chosen. Bastion awakes with the Empress, who presents him with a grain of sand, the sole remnant of Fantasia. The Empress tells Bastion that he has the power to bring Fantasia back with his imagination. Bastion recreates Fantasia and flies on Falkor's back to see the land and its inhabitants restored. When Falkor asks what his next wish will be, Bastion brings Falkor to the real world to chase down the school bullies. In a cliffhanger ending, the film narrates that Bastion had many more wishes and adventures, but that's another story.
And will be told at another time. I was like, why did you not finish the quote? Anyway. Yeah, no, I mean, I have a guess as to what upset Ende. The very ending where Falkor leaves Fantasia with Bastion on his back and they chase the bullies and he jumps in the dumpster. Like, this is a complete departure from the book.
Yeah, he fucking hated that. He did not like that at all.
I bet he really did. I will say, as a kid watching it, I remember thinking how cool that would be, and it was sort of a wish fulfillment idea of like being able to have a fantasy dragon and ride it around into our world. But in the story that Ende wanted to tell, it doesn't make sense and it doesn't line up with what happened. So I can see being really frustrated with it. It is kind of a weird, abrupt ending to this story, and it does feel like there's more story to tell. I guess it makes sense that they made sequels. Let's back up a little bit before we talk. I do want to touch a little bit on like ending and like what maybe could have been done differently or what they did do. But before we get past it, I want to back up a little bit and talk about some of the scenes you outlined there.
Yeah, let's start with Gamork and the way that he's in the ruins, and the ruins have depictions of this like prophecy that was always going to happen.
And then he sees the wolf in the cave, and then he looks over and it happens right then. I thought that was kind of a cool effect. Yeah. Atreyu challenging him. He's like, if we're going to go out, we're going to go out fighting. And then, again, we have to sort of imagine this battle as he jumps out and or this action. And then clearly he ends up stabbing him. I thought it was cool. And the breakdown of like what Fantasia is does align pretty closely with how the book describes it. You don't get as much depth, but that makes sense when you're adapting. You're just not going to be able to have the time to explore all of the same level of depth. I thought that all worked. I liked Gamork. The design of him was scary. He was all beat up, and I felt like it was a weird choice to have him be all beat up and then not really describe why. Like he was like all, I don't know. I wonder if that was the scene that got cut or something. But like he was like bleeding and all messed up in that cave, and we didn't have any sort of indication as to why.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I know that there were a couple things cut, like I said, Spielberg cut some stuff, but also there were a couple scenes that were like in the screenplay that ended up not even being filmed, and maybe that had something to do with it as well. But it doesn't make sense to have it beat up if there never was a fight.
Well, in the book, he's been trapped, and there's like a princess or something, and there's some sort of backstory as to why he is the way he is, but we don't get any of that here.
While we're here talking about this fight between Atreyu and Gamork, I did want to say that apparently Noah Hathaway had a really tough time on this film, the guy who played Atreyu. He was hurt many times in the production of this film.
Well, I kind of believe it.
When he was learning to ride a horse, his horse threw him off and then stepped on him at one point.
Ow.
That's before the production of the film. While shooting the sequence in the Swamp of Sadness with the horse, his leg got caught on the elevator and he was pulled underwater, and apparently he was unconscious by the time he was brought to the surface.
Holy shit.
Yeah. And then during this fight scene, he almost lost an eye. One of the claws, as the robot fell on him, one of the claws poked him in the face, like right next to his eye. And apparently the robot was so heavy that he like lost his breath when it hit him on the ground, like he got the wind knocked out of him and stuff. And so they only shot that one time. That was that one take because they didn't want him to get seriously injured. But I was thinking about a lot of this other stuff. There's the scene where you can tell that they have like a rotating set, and when the wind is blowing really heavily, and they like strapped the camera down to the set as it rotated, and it looked like he was like the wind was pushing him completely sideways as he's holding onto this tree. And I was just thinking, like, you can tell that it's him. He turns his face towards the camera at one point, and I was like, how far is this fall if he lets go of the tree? He's
doing all these stunts.
It seemed
kept getting knocked off of shit and like having to take tumbles, and yeah. I mean, they probably had stunt kids, I guess, but still,
they definitely did. I have a couple, yeah. Like there was one time for sure that I could tell that there was a stunt double in there, but I don't know. Yeah, it seems like it was pretty rough.
Well, and we talked about in our a bonus episode where we covered the Twilight Zone film, which would have been around this time. I'm not sure the exact year that one came out, but
yeah, it was around this time.
There was a horrific accident that resulted in the deaths of several children on the set of that.
Yep.
And I was just thinking about how in the 80s it was kind of the Wild West on movie sets, where there was maybe some rules, but like thankfully it seems like people are a lot more careful these days, and there's a lot more
there's
rules
like all kinds of codes and laws, things that
in place
films have to abide by now. That were kind of like not really stated. It was kind of like the moral thing to do was to, treat kids better than everybody else on set.
But there wasn't like requirements.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they have like authorities now, like code authorities that they have to abide by. But something else that I was hearing is that Wolfgang Peterson was such a perfectionist apparently on this film, and that the budget considerably inflated, and that's what made it one of the most expensive German films of ever, especially at this time. And then reportedly some of the time he pushed for up to 40 takes on each scene in the movie.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is just sounds absolutely brutal to me.
That had to be maddening. Yeah, especially with some of how physical some of these scenes were. for like Atreyu, who is in the majority of them.
Yeah.
It had to be really tough.
I think the main 3 actors that we got, Noah Hathaway, Barrett Oliver, and Tammy Stronach, I thought that all of them were excellent, especially for their ages when this film was being made. Barrett, who played Bastian, was really, really relatable and had like a lot of emotion in his performance and in the cutaways back to the real world. Like it was very believable.
Yeah.
And I thought that Tammy Stronach, just her performance when she did show up as the Empress was very like, it was a performance well beyond her years.
Yeah.
I think she was like 10 or something when they filmed it. So it's like,
I totally agree. Shout out to her. Actually, she liked our tweet for our last episode. I don't know if you know this. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
She liked our tweet about the episode out of the blue.
That's awesome. That's excellent.
I went and looked, and she's like blue checked on Twitter. It's actually her.
That's
so I just
awesome.
thought that was cool.
Very cool. Shout out to her. Seriously.
Yeah. Very neat. And I do want to say like that space scene is a big change from the book. I don't remember it looking like that, where they're sort of flying through an asteroid field and then they find the sort of flying remnants of the ivory tower. I thought it looked very cool, and again, it just reminds me of a very particular time in the 80s and like the way stuff looked. It looked like something off of a poster. Very cool. And then shout out to every performance. I think the difference you can tell between like Bastian and the bullies is pretty stark. The level of acting, like, you know what I mean? Like the bullies, I think were pretty rough. Not to completely shit on them, but like you could just tell the difference, right? With what they were able to get from the leads and what they weren't able to get from some of the others. I mean, I guess, what else is there to talk about in this movie?
I think we need to talk about the ending.
The ending,
here,
like
what
they could have changed. Yeah, so in the book, if you didn't listen to our book episode, Bastian enters Fantasia like he does here a little bit, but he remakes Fantasia, and then he gets the power to make wishes, which is touched on here, and that power goes to his head, and he becomes the new emperor, and he starts to forget his former life, and he has to be reminded of it in certain ways. Atreyu ends up saving him, and together he is able to find a way to re-enter our world, and he comes out as sort of like a changed person who is more able to accept his life in the way it is. He is able to find a connection to his father, who was very distant and depressed. Feels like he finds a way to deal with the death of his mother, and he returns the book to Coriander. These are all things that don't occur in the film. Do you think they could have done it in this movie? The movie was about an hour and a half. If you had another 30 minutes, could you have pulled off enough of this to make it work?
I mean, genuinely, probably, but I think the thing that you risk is with a movie like this going 2 hours for a kid's movie, it starts to become a little excessive, but maybe cutting some stuff earlier. There's not a ton that I would love to cut, but I'm sure there's some stuff that you could cut to try to get it around like an hour 45, hour 50. But specifically the scenes of having gone through the journey, grown as a character, and in the ways that he's more confident, he brings that into the real world, eventually having been humbled also by having that confidence go too far. And then returning the book, I feel like is such a massive thing in the even in this movie. He said, "I promise I'll bring it back with a note," and it's implied that he brings it back eventually, maybe. But I would have liked to have at least seen some of that sort of wrap up where we should have gotten an indication that he became more confident, and we kind of did, but he's now able to live in a fantasy world, it seems like, almost also. So if we had seen he brought that into his own world, had another conversation with his dad, and then had another conversation at the bookshop with Coriander, and sort of wrap it up in that way without maybe having to dig into all of what happens in the second half, I would have liked to have seen some of that as well.
I think there's a way you could have done it, with the caveat of this movie was already over budget and one of the most expensive ones ever made in Germany, and probably was struggling to be made even as it currently is, right? So if you're adding 30 minutes to a movie, you're adding a significant amount of new scenes, new puppetry, new everything, and expense. And so I realize that there are real world limitations. But aside from that, I do think there was space to make this a little more similar to the book, to add some of those moments at the end. And I think the book itself, we talked about in our last episode, there's a lot that you can cut and still sort of get the gist of Bastian's journey in the second half of that novel. And I do believe more could have been done to align it in that way. Now, if that's something Wolfgang Peterson just didn't want to do, like, I understand you got two different people who have different visions and care about different things. I get it. But I tend to side with Ende in a little bit, in the sense that I think the story is more resonant and has a stronger message and has a better character arc for Bastian, with some semblance of the ending that he wrote intact. And instead, we don't really get any of that, and it does feel very much like a cliffhanger, or like the movie just kind of ran out of time. And that's not really a great place to like end on. So
it's a miracle that it exists in its current form, obviously, especially with the impact that it had at the time that it came out. And we like both confess that in the book episode, we felt like it really spun its wheels for a while, and a lot of like unnecessary things were added in there. But yeah, finishing the arc, I think would have been really nice. Barring the fact that the budget, they were way over budget already. I don't know. And part of me thinks like, it does get really kind of, we talked about like the shift in tone that happens in the movie, in the book as well, and like to have to try to do that in the movie. I think I can understand where Peterson's coming from with needing to lop that off and kind of make this its own self-contained thing. And clearly like people still reacted to it in a way that I think Ende wanted, sort of like engaging the imagination and like understanding like the relationship between reader and book and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I see the argument for it. I don't think that it's necessary, but it would have been cool to see. I would have loved to see Peterson continue out and finalize especially like I said, the stuff that I would have liked to have seen from this movie, another scene with the father and another scene with Coriander to sort of wrap those threads.
So here's what I think it boils down to for me. The movie presents a story where Bastian enters this fantasy world that he's been engaging with throughout the entire film, is able to ride a dragon into his world and scare the bullies who have been pestering him, and to sort of get payback on the back of a dragon. In the book, Bastian comes away from Fantastica having learned about himself in a way that gives him the inner strength to tackle the demons of the real world in a way that he was not equipped to do when he started reading the book. He was changed by his experience in Fantastica, and he came away with a new strength. And that is a more interesting and powerful message, I think, for readers and for viewers to take away, of like the power of stories to give us the strength to come into our real lives and tackle the problems we face. And the message of, wouldn't it be cool to have a dragon and then you could chase down bullies, is just not the same.
I do think that there's room there to say, like, he took what was an idea and then made it literal. Like, he took something from that story, brought it into the world literally to help him in his daily life. Like, I think the messaging is still there. It's just not as subtle as what you're saying.
Yeah, right. Like, if they were trying to evoke that essence with the writing of Falkor into the real world, like that's like a metaphor for what you're saying. Yeah, I get it.
Right. Metaphor made literal.
And I could see that, but I guess I'm kind of with Ende here. I just wish they'd found a way to make it equitable and make it so that he could be happy putting his name on this thing, because it's a shame to see it without his name attached.
I agree. I totally agree with that. It's a bummer.
All right, here we are at the end. You know what time it is. We got to decide what the better version of this one is.
We kind of just hashed it out a little bit. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, but like, I'll go first, but like, I honestly, I don't know, because there was so much filler and so much, it's kind of bad to call it filler. It's not really filler, but like there's a lot that happens in the book that doesn't feel super necessary. I felt like the book really dragged in the second half. And the movie is this like stunning achievement in visual effects, I think, for the time. It was an awesome nostalgic ride for me to go back and view it. So many great visuals, so many great just moments in this. I'm really struggling to pick a favorite between the two. I think both have significant flaws, but both really really achieve something cool. I guess for me, I'm going to give it to the book, because Ende's story as someone who, worked against the SS and grew up with this surrealist painter of a father who clearly he's emulating in his ideas and his design for his world. And then the meta-textual narrative we get with Bastian reading, and the fact that I'm reading a book, I think it directly ties in a way that just works a little bit better. And then I like the idea of seeing his concepts fully realized and executed in a way that the film felt a little bit truncated. All of that being said, the book does still have flaws, like I've gone over. So it was close, but I'm gonna give it to the book personally.
Yeah. Honestly, it's a shame that Ende like sort of felt like he didn't want to be associated with the movie, and props to him for basically writing the entirety of what shows up in the film, even though it's only half of his vision. And like those reasons are obviously like massive when thinking about these two in comparison to each other. But I'm going to be a little biased on this one because of the emotional impact, because of the time period that it came out, because of like what it's become in the zeitgeist of all I think the world in general. I'm going to take the movie because of the achievement that it was for the time, and the performances and the set design and how memorable it is. And but I can't be overstated how important Ende was to the process of this being made, even though he wanted to be separated from it eventually. Honestly, the biggest shame of it all is that it should be his legacy as well, and it doesn't feel like he has the attachment to it. People don't associate him with it as much,
at least in our country,
especially in America. Yeah, in America.
Yeah, man, I'm glad. I think that's appropriate. Honestly, this is another one where it was so close. I'm glad one of us took each version. I think that's a good place. Stick around to the end of the episode because we're going to announce our next project that was voted on by our patrons, and it may surprise you because it's something that is very outside of our typical wheelhouse.
But I'm very excited to cover it.
Yeah.
As soon as it was decided for us, I was super stoked.
All right, and we'll reveal that shortly. If you enjoyed this episode and our coverage of the NeverEnding story in general, let us know about it. You can tweet at us, you can comment on our Facebook page or what have you. But we would love to also see a rating and review where you maybe outline what you enjoyed about our coverage, that kind of thing. That helps us get the word out and increase our rankings a little bit. And make sure to subscribe on whatever platform you used. All those little metrical things that help, like the video on YouTube, that kind of stuff.
If you wanted to support this podcast, maybe think about checking out our Patreon. It's patreon.com/ink2film. We have many different tiers, but monthly for our $2 tier, we put out bonus content, usually adaptation adjacent. And if you like NeverEnding Story, you can be sure that we're going to do NeverEnding Story at some point in the near future.
NeverEnding Story 2, you mean?
Yeah. We will be revisiting NeverEnding Story in a sense. And there's I think 2 other movies, maybe even 3 other movies.
Wow.
So there's other stuff that we could dig into if we wanted to revisit this world if people are really interested in it. So yeah, definitely check out our Patreon. We also have tiers for merch. We have t-shirts and all kinds of other stuff. Check it out.
Yeah. Speaking of Patreon, we also just put out a new video on there, and it is us doing a tier ranking of all of the projects we covered in our third season of our podcast. A lot of fun doing that. Still getting used to the process of recording video, but I think it turned out pretty well. I had a fun time with it. So if you're curious about that, check it out on Patreon.
Connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at ink2film.
And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music. Here we are at the end. So we recently had a poll Started out on Facebook where people commented suggestions, and then I had people like the comments that they agreed with, essentially, and that was just different suggestions for different projects we could do. And then we took that to our patrons, the top 4 results, and we put a poll on there, and we do this every quarter to determine what our quarterly project would be. And the winner was Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice and the 2005 film adaptation. This is a novel that I've heard about so many times. It's beloved by just so many people. I've never read it. I've never seen the movie. My wife, it's like one of her favorite movies. She's very excited that I'm finally going to be covering it. She's going to watch it with me. She already told me. So that should be really cool. Again, it's just not something I've ever really delved into, but I'm interested. I know it takes place during the Regency era. It's got some very famous romantic plot lines in there that people reference a lot. I think there's like Mr. Darcy, I think, is like in this one. I don't know. We'll see. We'll get into all of it. What do you think about it?
I'm just excited because it's one of those that I feel like I need to read in order to like be engage with all different genre.
Right.
And it's one that I don't have a ton of experience in, and covering something that's this massive that you hear people talk about all the time, like to have that blind spot, it just feels embarrassing at this point. So like to get a chance to cover it, I'm so excited.
And if you're like us, if this is not the kind of thing you ever read or know anything about, I think it should still be fun to check out the episode and just get a sense for like what we thought of it, because we'll give our general reaction at the top of the episode and let you know like what was it like going so far out our wheelhouse and what were our takeaways. So if that sounds interesting to you, our next 2 weeks are going to be Pride and Prejudice. We're going to cover the book and then the film. Should be a ton of fun, and we hope you join us for that. But until next time,
keep adapting.